Welcome back to Red Fence, where politics gets pulled apart with no talking points, no filters, no blind loyalty. I'm your host, ABH. Today, we are looking at a major legal decision out of Virginia that is sending ripples across the national political landscape. The Virginia Supreme Court has officially struck down a voter-approved congressional redistricting map, a move that carries heavy implications for the upcoming midterm elections. The Virginia Supreme Court struck down a voter-approved congressional redistricting plan on procedural grounds, holding that the amendment process did not comply with the Virginia Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court then declined to revive the map, leaving the old districts in place for now. But before we get into the specific constitutional violation, let's talk about the map itself. How did this redistricting plan come to be, and what would it have changed? The Virginia plan arose as a Democrat-led mid-decade redistricting effort designed to capitalize on Republican-driven map changes in other states, and it would have shifted Virginia's congressional delegation sharply toward Democrats. After several Republican-controlled states such as Texas, Missouri, and North Carolina enacted new congressional maps in 2025, Virginia Democrats pushed a constitutional amendment to allow the state legislature to redraw its own congressional map before the 2031 redistricting cycle. The amendment, passed by the Democratic-controlled General Assembly in 2025 and certified for a special election, allowed the legislature, rather than the bipartisan redistricting commission, to draw new districts if another state had already redrawn its map. In April 2026, voters narrowly approved both the constitutional change and the Democratic-drawn map, which was then ratified by the legislature and set to take effect. What would it change? Under the existing 2021 map, Virginia's 11-seat delegation stood at 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans. The new Democratic map was projected to give Democrats a 10-to-1 edge, with only one solidly Republican seat remaining. Analysts estimated that the reconfigured districts, especially the way suburbs of Arlington and Fairfax were split and paired with rural Republican areas, could have flipped as many as 4 additional House seats from Republican to Democratic hands in the 2026 midterms. Because the Virginia Supreme Court later voided the map on procedural grounds, those changes never took effect, and Virginia will use the older 6D/5R map for the current cycle, unless the process is legally reset. That brings us to the core of the legal battle. Virginia Democrats backed a constitutional amendment and new congressional map intended to improve their chances in the 2026 midterms, and voters approved it in April. But the Virginia Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that the lawmakers had not followed the required steps for placing the amendment before voters. The ruling did not focus on whether the map was politically fair, it focused on whether the process used to get it on the ballot was valid under state law. The map would have given Democrats a shot at as many as 4 additional House seats, which is why the ruling was seen as a major setback for them. It also came amid a broader national redistricting battle, with both parties trying to redraw maps before the midterms. In that sense, Virginia briefly looked like a Democratic counterweight to Republican-led redistricting moves in other states before the court reversed course. What were the legal arguments used by the Bipartisan Redistricting Commission? The Bipartisan Virginia Redistricting Commission did not directly draw the controversial 2026 map, but Republican-backed challengers, including legislators and statewide officials aligned with the Commission's original role, raised several key legal arguments attacking the legislature's authority and the amendment process. Plaintiffs argued that the General Assembly did not comply with Article 11, Section 1 of the Virginia Constitution, which requires 2 separate legislative approvals of a constitutional amendment with an intervening election in between. They contended that the first vote occurred in a 2024 special session that had already functionally ended, and that the second legislative action was too close in time to the 2025 general election to satisfy the intervening election requirement. The Republican-backed challenger said the legislature improperly invoked or reused the 2024 special session call for a topic unrelated to redistricting, which, they argued, stripped the chamber of authority to initiate the amendment in that session. They claimed the amendment was not properly before the legislature in the way the Constitution contemplates, so the later vote could not validly start the constitutional amendment clock. Plaintiffs invoked the 1902 statute requiring the proposed constitutional amendment to be posted on courthouse doors 90 days before the next election. They argued that lawmakers never timely held the required legislative vote such that the amendment could have been posted 90 days in advance. So the referendum was structurally defective. The commission-backed side stressed that the Virginia Constitution assigns congressional redistricting to the bipartisan commission with Supreme Court backup, and that the amendment temporarily stripping that role and giving it to the legislature undermined the commission's constitutional function. They argued that the amendment's effect was to bypass the commission-driven process voters had previously endorsed, which they cast as both a procedural and structural violation of the state's redistricting framework. What exactly did the General Assembly do wrong in the eyes of the court? The key legal issue was not the merits of the map itself, but the legislature's compliance with the constitutional amendment process. According to the court, procedural defects in how the measure was advanced to voters were enough to invalidate the result, even after the referendum passed. The Democrats argued the state court was wrong and sought emergency relief from the U.S. Supreme Court, but the justices declined to intervene. For the 2026 election cycle, Virginia will use the existing congressional map unless another valid legal change occurs. That preserves the status quo in a state where control of a few seats could matter nationally in a closely divided House. The ruling also signaled that state procedural rules can be just as decisive as partisan outcomes in redistricting fights. The Virginia Supreme Court tossed the voter-approved redistricting plan mainly because the legislature did not follow the specific, sequential steps the Virginia Constitution requires to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot. The key procedural errors the court identified were defective legislative referral to voters, improper placement on the ballot, and failure to respect the Constitution's amendment sequence. Defective legislative referral to voters. The court held that the General Assembly did not properly pass the redistricting measure as a constitutional amendment in two separate regular sessions, as required by Article 11, Section 1 of the Virginia Constitution. Instead, lawmakers tried to shortcut the process by using a non-session-specific bill and an unusual legislative maneuver, which the court viewed as failing to satisfy the Constitution's two-session rule. Even though the measure appeared on the April 2026 ballot and voters approved it, the court ruled that the underlying defect in how the amendment was referred to the people could not be cured by the popular vote. The opinion treated the referendum as advisory on a defective constitutional proposal, not as a validly enacted constitutional amendment under Virginia's own rules. Failure to respect the Constitution's amendment sequence. The justices emphasized that the Virginia Constitution lays out a strict, self-executing sequence: committee review, first session passage, second session passage, then referral to voters, and the legislature skipped or compressed steps in that chain. Because the court viewed this as a structural defect in the amendment process, itself not merely a technical paperwork problem, the defect invalidated the resulting map, regardless of whether the lines were gerrymandered or not. In short, the court did not strike the map because it favored Democrats. It struck it because, in the court's view, the legislature never legally completed the constitutional amendment machinery required to put those lines into force. That wraps up this episode of Red Fence. Whether you view this ruling as a defense of constitutional procedure or a setback for direct democracy, one thing is clear: the battle for the House will be fiercely contested in every single district. What are your thoughts?